Production note for audio description, sound booth at the Feminist Media Studio. This piece was written and performed by Prakash Krishnan on location at the new sound booth located within the Feminist Media Studio, FMS, at Concordia University's Loyola campus. A technology shared between the FMS and the Access in the Making Lab, AIM, this piece disrupts the notion of audio description as solely a sterile accessory within a suite of accessibility practices. Instead, it rearticulates descriptive practices as a mode of sensorial engagement that is both political and feminist in nature. While members of FMS and AIM engage in projects around accessibilizing our spaces, access to the sound booth is nevertheless restricted by multiple barriers. First, university protocols restricted access to buildings both during and preceding the COVID-19 related closures. Second, the FMS itself requires an authorized keycard to enter, and the room within which the sound booth is housed requires an additional key to be unlocked. Third, the dimensions of the sound booth itself cannot accommodate the use of a wheelchair inside. As someone able to bypass these restrictions, I described the environment in a way to fragment the booth and the space, highlighting the histories and non-neutrality of the space. Entering the Feminist Media Studio's largest editing suite, it is impossible to ignore the white obelisk protruding from the ground. Facing the entrance is one corner edge of the obelisk. It stands over 2 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide. The ubiquitous white of each of the two visible sides are marked only by the edges of the series of uniform rectangular panels that compose its exterior. The rest of the studio space is also quite large and bizarre. Trapezoidal in shape, its longest wall, the right, is convex, ballooning the space with its creative potential. The lower right wall is stacked with miscellaneous equipment, 7 gray foam wall panels, 2 neon yellow ladders, a pile of amorphous beanbags, each the size of a single mattress. The floor is marked with green painter's tape, pointing to no clear direction, but remain as trace documents for activities once supported in the space. It is only by crossing the room and turning and facing back toward the entrance is the door to the obelisk revealed. Breaking the uniformity of the other 3 sides, the door consists of a thick, clear glass pane in a black frame with a silver handle. The door swings outwards to reveal the sound booth I'm standing in. The ceiling and upper 3/4 of the booth are coated with the sound-absorbing textured dark gray foam. Small round hills descend from the ceiling foam, contrasted with the thick foam squares protruding from the sides. The equipment in the booth consists of a microphone encapsulated inside of a metal cage and descends from a movable metal arm. Supported on a small white ledge is a keyboard and mouse corresponding to the monitor screen that hangs from above. There is a very faint hum emerging from the ventilation fan, but all I can hear now is my own voice and breath. This is our sound booth.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Program note for the wave passes through the sole of the foot and goes up into the index finger while I press play. In 1974, a Rolling Stone article relayed the encounter of an uncanny new device, the sonic stimulator, a machine developed by Hal Warkspress that allows users to feel sound. The same year, information technologist Ted Nelson dedicated a segment of his seminal computer lib Dream Machines on Warkspress psychoacoustic experiments. The wave passes through the sole of the foot and goes up into the index finger while I press play is a reflection on listening beyond hearing, created by media artist and student Anne-Marie Trépanier as part of the 2-week interactive workshop Talking to Each Other, facilitated by the Feminist Media Studio and Access in the Making Lab at Concordia University. In this short audio piece, these two documents are remediated into a speculative narrative. An old answering machine cassette tape is played back. A voice recounts their curiosity for this new piece of technology that expands sonic perception beyond oral mechanisms. Envisioned as a form of media archaeology, this work is an invitation to revisit technological artifacts from the past and wonder which organs are involved in listening, which technologies allow us to access sound, and how do they shape the way we listen.
Remember how we laughed at the Orgasmotron in Woody Allen's Sleeper? Well, it turns out not to be a joke. An individual named Howard Walkspress has been developing just that, except that he has more elevated purposes in mind. Transpose sound into feeling. You touch your body with an open-ended tube or some other kind of soft fixture attached to a device, which in turn is attached to a hi-fi. Supposedly, the sensations are very, very profound and moving. You apparently can take bandwidth anywhere on your body, and the effect is super relaxing and emotionally engrossing. Thinks he has reached an entire neurological system that wasn't known before. He thinks that it is kind of a new modality of experience and a generalization of music and touch. Here, I'll read you an excerpt of an interview I've read in the Rolling Stone. The sonic simulator idea is simple. The ear is a specialized organ for transmitting sound signals to the brain, but since sound is merely physical vibration, any pressure-sensitive organ can hear. The palm of the hand, for example, very good, says Howe. Good hi-fi reception because of its abundance of nerve endings. Or the groin, also good for the same reason, and because of the various internal organs nearby, each with its own complement of sensors. The elbows and the knees are good listeners too, because they readily transfer sound vibrations to the skeleton, thus messages from all over the body. Anyway, I find this whole sonic stimulator thing super intriguing. I just wanted to share. Let me know what you think. Call me back. Bye. Cheers.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Program note for In Search of Stillness. Dipping her toes into the world of sound, graduate student and artist Jessie Staton's In Search of Stillness explores the conflicting sites of access and inaccess that exist in Montreal's Parc Jarry. As part of the 2-week collective sounding workshop, Talking to Each Other, by the Feminist Media Studio and Access in the Making Lab, the sonic walk and sound collage is comprised entirely of field recordings at the park, most of which were recorded over a 2-day period. What notably emerged was a contradiction. The best place to hear the red-winged blackbirds requires one to hop over 7 stones, making it thoroughly inaccessible. The goal of this piece is to highlight the access variability that exists within the park, while also tuning into how bodies move through space. You're invited to listen and reflect on the precarity of the public spaces that you frequent, and how the built environment shapes and dictates these experiences.
Jarry, May 3rd, 9 a.m. It's colder than it's been for the past few days and quite windy, making it difficult to record. Walk from the southeast Vilray entrance over the crusty curb cut onto a well-maintained brick path about 5 meters wide. Walk towards the fountain as the brick turns to dark pavement under the trees. The path will shrink about 2 meters wide. Turn left when the path peels around the pond, expanding to at least 5 meters again.
Four people square dancing. Or swing dancing? I don't really know. You literally cannot move.
Keep walking when the path turns to gravel and gradually inclines. To the right, there are smooth gray stones that form a jagged bridge to an island a few meters into the pond. Hop 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stones, and you're there, the island. If you're still enough, you'll get face to face with a red-winged blackbird.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
This piece depicts my complicated relationship to Microsoft Word's dictate function, which shows the enabling and disabling features of AI technology. This function allows me to write documents orally, as opposed to typing. As someone who speaks as a medium to think, this function has been a blessing. Being able to switch between speaking and writing has been a substitute for the shifts of movement that were embedded in my writing before COVID-19. Prior to the pandemic, movement in my writing was created by relocating myself to different places, such as a cafe or a library. The dictate function has replicated some of that movement, but these affordances come with hindrances of their own. The dictate function is often inaccurate, which is exacerbated by the quality of my headphones. Additionally, words such as sex and domination are automatically blurred, which limits what topics can be written aloud. After the recording of the final version of the program note, I changed the piece to more directly reflect the miscommunication that occurs during the dictation process by overlapping the dictate version of my final recording, as read by Microsoft's automated voice, and my original reading.
This piece depicts my complicated relationship to Microsoft Word's dictate function, which shows the enabling and disabling features of technology. This function allows me to write documents orally as opposed to typing. As someone who speaks as a medium to think, this function has been a blessing. Additionally, being able to switch between speaking and writing has been a substitute for the shifts and movement that were embedded in my writing before COVID-19 period prior to the pandemic. Movement in my writing was created by relocating myself to different places such as a cafe or a library. The dictate function has replicated some of that movement, but these affordances come with hindrances of their own. The dictate function is often inaccurate, which is exasperated by the quality of my headphones. Additionally, call my word search as saxon or automatically blurred, which limits what topics can be written aloud. This piece mimics the process of creating this program note. The process is speaking aloud, retyping, and then using the read over function to review my work layered over one another to show the messiness that comes along with using AI in this way. The full transcript of all the layers are attached.
That comes along with using AI in this way. The full transcript of all layers are attached.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Healing Through Fairy Tales is a prototype concept piece utilizing the skill set developed through the Talking to Each Other workshop offered through the Feminist Media Studio and Access in the Making Lab at Concordia University. The goal of this piece is to explore the healing and trauma processing capabilities of audio storytelling. Conceptually, I was looking to create a form of fairy tale storytelling akin to the form of children's audiobooks, but with adult/trauma symptom content reframed as fairy tales. This piece represents the first of a series of chapters exploring this narrative framework. Opening music credit, Serenity, by Tanner Please on Spotify. Closing music credit, Stardust, by Kacharta Nabel on Free Music Sounds. Thank you to Buy Amazon Stock, Merchant, and Shurio W., Stranger for voice performances.
Once upon a time, a young woman named Vanna lived in a small village. She lived alone in a modest cottage at the edge of town. Vanna was friendly with the village folk, as she had known them all her life, but she kept to herself most of the time. One day, during a trip to the town market, Vanna saw a man, a strange man, browsing the merchant's stalls. The village was small, and strangers, though not uncommon, stood out amongst the faces she saw every day. As she continued about her shopping, Vanel tried to walk past the stranger. Maybe she could overhear what brought him to the village.
Why, those are from folk tales.
So have you not seen anyone who appears like so?
Creatures from children's stories. They are nothing but make-believe. If there is nothing you wish to purchase.
Thank you for your time.
Creatures? Folk tales. Vanel wondered why the stranger would be searching for such things, when everyone knew they were not real. Shaking her head slightly, she continued about her errands, only now realizing Miss Morel was talking about the soft fabric that Vanel absent-mindedly ran between her fingertips. Returning her focus to the conversation, Vanel pushed away thoughts of the stranger from her mind. Make-believe tales were the pastimes of children. As she walked home with her arms overburdened with her purchases, Vanel regretted buying the soft fabric. Lovely as it was, she had not needed it, and she had simply felt compelled to buy it for having occupied so much of Miss Morel's time with her mind wandering. Vanel lamented her concern for others' feelings over her own basic needs. She had had no money left to purchase the food she needed to prepare her meals for the week. Vanel arrived home just before dark. She sighed in dismay at the disarray inside her home. If her mother were still alive, she would be beside herself at the chaotic state in which her daughter lived. But Vanel could not seem to remedy the situation. As much as she yearned to build her space into one where she need not step around objects strewn across the floor, or clear pathways to traverse her tiny home, she struggled to even begin. The task of cleaning seemed unbearably overwhelming, causing her to become discouraged before she could start. Occasionally, she did manage to organize a small space here or there, but even that drained what little energy she had, so she was rarely able to follow through with the rest of her home. Vanel turned to the space she had been working on, but all of her motivation was gone. Such moments of eagerness to tidy were so few and far between, like a rare treasure in some children's tale, that having lost her determination at the hands of that annoying man made her dislike him even more. Stroking the new fabric, she fell deep into her thoughts. All she had wanted was to be a normal woman, one who kept a tidy home, one who did not waste her little funds on unnecessary goods, perhaps even one who would welcome the interest of an attentive stranger. She shook her head and released the fabric from her hands. Vanel knew she would never be a normal woman. She would never be like the others in the village, the ones who kept a proper schedule, who managed their homes and their money, who were able to balance their lives the way a woman should. Vanel would never meet those standards, and she had accepted that long ago. Perhaps that is why she so rarely found the motivation to organize her home, for she had resigned herself to this space, befitting one as abnormal as she. Vanel laid upon her cluttered bed, half the space occupied by clothing she had washed but failed to put in its proper place, and wrapped herself in her blanket, the fabric holding her like a familiar hug. The day had started so well, yet once again her mind had wandered away, only to drag her back into the gray thoughts that had plagued her so often. Her last thought, as she drifted off to sleep, was of the woman she would never be, and how disappointing she would have been if her family could see what had become of her.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Program note for We Ought or Not by Jonathan Stern. Additional voices, Carrie Rentschler, 6 anonymous speakers, and various processors. This piece dramatizes the process of automatic speaker identification. In 2020 and 2021, more than 1 million Canadians moved their university education online, using Zoom for meetings. Access advocates quickly noted that Zoom has a captioning function and urged people to use it. Most users chose automatic captioning, which is provided by a company called Otter.ai. Otter's user agreement says that its users do not own any data that result from the processing of their voices. One such kind of data is voice printing. Like fingerprinting, the idea is that each person's voice can be uniquely identified. The science behind voice prints is not very good or accurate, but that has not stopped the machine learning industry from trying. For We Ought or Not, I sent a request to the students in my Disability, Technology, and Communication seminar to use the sound of their voices, but not what they said, as the basis for a piece about voice identification. And I sent the request after grades were posted. 6 out of 14 students consented. If the same basic rules of consent were applied to Otter, it would not have millions of voices to process. A spectrum appears on screen, representing the sum total of sounds that you can hear. From left to right, there are the colors violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. And the streams of color fall from the top of the screen towards the bottom, like a colorful waterfall. Constantly shifting lattice patterns of more or less intense colors become visible and fade within each band. Total darkness indicates the absence of a frequency. The colors will continue falling on the screen for the duration of this piece. Layer 1. Every voice has a spectrum. Every voice has a kepstrum.
9.3 limited license grant to Otter.ai. Customer retains all ownership rights to the user content processed using the service. You grant Otter.ai a worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, fully paid right and license with the right to sub-license to host, store, transfer, display, perform, reproduce, modify, export, process, transform, and distribute your user content in whole or in part in any media formats and through any media channels now known or hereafter developed and through any media channels now known or hereafter developed and through any media channels and through channels through
Layer 2. Every mouth makes transients, or let's crunch some data.
Machine learning. Otter.ai shall have the right to collect and analyze data and other information relating to the provision, use, and performance of various aspects of the service and related systems and technologies, quote-unquote, usage data. This service may be implemented using machine learning systems with features and implementations designed to generate statistics, calibrate data models, and improve algorithms in the course of processing user content and usage data, quote-unquote, machine learning. Machine usage learning. Data.
Layer 3. Every speaker has a cadence.
Nothing in these terms gives you any rights in or to any part of the service or the machine learning generated by company or the machine learning generated in the course of providing the service.
The sound will soon stop. Then the waterfall of color will run out, dropping into a blackness that eventually takes over the screen. There's nothing left to hear. There's nothing left to analyze. There is no one left to identify.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Program note for the privilege of quiet. Early COVID reporting highlighted how the confinement had quieted human activity and left room for nature to sing again. This seemed like the only good news in a sea of reports of contagion, illness, and death. It was read as a sign that perhaps COVID-19 was healing the world from the wounds of anthropogenic climate change. The privilege of quiet seeks to distance itself from this celebration of nature's triumph, to listen to what's not heard in both hopeful recordings of bird songs and apocalyptic ones of sirens wailing, the cacophony of essential services, and the precarity of laborers who continue to show up to work. The rhythms of these places are noisy, but also repetitively ambient, holding their own non-alarming but steadily exploitative drumbeat. In listening to essential workplaces, the piece asks how quiet and noise might be more justly distributed, and how this might contribute to more socially and ecologically liberatory futures. The one non-archival sound is a frog's mating calls, mistaken for a car alarm. It provides a coda for thinking the reversals and inversions of nature and culture, noise and silence, and quiet and cacophony. When the pandemic confinement quieted the streets of human traffic, people noticed that they could hear birds singing in the city and wildlife that had been muted by urban noise. Folks shared recordings from their balconies. Reports emerged that the oceans were quieter, and seismologists' instruments could now hear the Earth's vibrations better. This momentary illusion fed dreams that we could decelerate and somehow slow down. Birds were the sound of ecological justice, of healing despite our isolation. But who had access to that particular kind of quiet? How's that quiet tied to the privilege of confinement? What other forms of quiet and noise continued their drumbeat for essential workers who stayed on the front line despite the risks of contagion? What's the cacophony of being essential? What's the relation between precarity and noise, between privilege and silence? Could quiet itself be a right? Could cacophony be better distributed? What other sound might resound on the front line?
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Walking With is a sound clip that functions as an introduction for an augmented reality audio walk. This AR project will be presented at the end of the summer in the city of Montreal. It will be supported by the free mobile app Echoes, using sound geolocative technologies. The sound clip is intended to give a brief explanation to users about the feminist artists and activists involved, the general structure of the walk, and a few recommendations to listen to this piece. This sound clip also works as a teaser in the dissemination of the AR walk, providing a general framework to future audiences. The music that you will hear in the background was produced by Vivas, and the voices are extracts from the collective interviews. Thank you so much to the Feminist Media Studio for their technical support in the development of this clip, as well as members of this workshop for their feedback. Walking With, an oral essay about collective feminism, is an augmented reality audio walk featuring the voices of activists and artists who embrace the collage as a tool of resistance, exploration, and coalition, working collectively for freedom, autonomy, and equality. The song walk features the voices from 3 street art collectives: Collage Féminicides Paris, Collage Féminicides and Feministes Montreal, and #Vivas, a Latin American-based collective that produces sound artworks from political marches and protests. The oral essay will take the form of a sonic collage, inviting audiences to embody the experience of walking while listening to these interviews. The soundscapes are produced by Vivas, and the street interventions by Collage Feministes and Feminicides, Montreal. The audio will be activated with your walk, using the cell phone geolocation to trigger the sounds in the selected routes. In this walk, you will hear 3 different languages: Spanish, English, and French. The path of each interview will be visible in the digital map, with an interviewee description card. Along the route, you might find collages placed in the street. Get closer to them to hear the soundscapes produced by Vivas. You can choose to listen to this walk through headphones, but we recommend it to hear this with another person using your cell phone speakers or Bluetooth speakers. This option will open a collective listening and to occupy the streets with their voices and soundscapes. The project uses platform or augmented reality, a medium that allows invisible layers of memory to be perceived with our cell phones, as mediators of the unseen narratives in the space. This project exists in solidarity with women, transgender, non-binary, and queer individuals who have been feeling unsafe and have experienced exclusion in the public space. This soundwalk invites all listeners to sonically immerse into these feminist initiatives, activating their voices with your own walk.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Wee-oo is an intimate and playful exploration of the fleeting nature of listening and interpreting, and searches for possible ways to integrate visual and auditive components in a preoccupation for accessibility. The idea behind the sound piece came from a desire to untangle an apparent incompatibility between the need for clarity in subtitles and closed captions, and the use of opacity as resistance. On one hand, making sound accessible to the non-hearing would entail finding an exact and objective description of audio. On the other, listening is understood as a subjective experience, shaped by memory, culture, and body, and where opacity can be a form of resistance to extraction. Bringing together both preoccupations for accessibility with possible open-ended forms, the piece is composed of a recorded soundscape, of 3 overlapping voices that imitate its sounds, and of a video that shows the handwritten subtitles of each imitation.
Bling 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 bling.
This video was made in the context of a 2-week workshop for Talking to Each Other, a multimedia project on the topics of access, disability, and collective sound making. The workshop was facilitated by Piper Curtis and Razan Al-Salah. The Talking to Each Other project was directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab and the Feminist Media Studio. You can find more information and the full video transcripts at accessinthemaking.ca and feministmediastudio.ca.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us, for listening, watching, feeling. And congratulations to all the participants. Thank you for your work. My name is Razan Salah. I'm an artist and teacher. I have black, untamed, curly short hair, particularly untamed today because of the heat. Brown eyes, fair skin, big glasses, long face with a big smile. I'm also the co-director of the Feminist Media Studio, and since we've been coming together virtually, we've changed our land acknowledgement to remind ourselves and everyone of the material infrastructure of digital media, resounding the most essential indigenous demand for land back, material reparations. This is a verbal reminder of for land back. We would like to begin this conversation with an acknowledgement that while Discord Inc. is the technical platform on which we gather, this makes us no less occupants of the multiple territories on which we are all physically located. The Feminist Media Studio continues to be situated on the lands of the Ganyangahaga Nation, and just because we cede our spaces of physical gathering during the pandemic, we have not unceded them yet. The platform on which we gather also does not emerge out of the ether. It is a product of Silicon Valley, generated $130 million revenue in 2020 alone, 188% increase. In 2021, it was valued at $7 billion, doubling its value in under a year, even as the economy crumbles around us. Discord headquarters are located on Mwekma Olone territory. The Olone have historically understood about sustainability, about communal societies, about giving gifts to those who passed by, and about sharing space. Their horizontal organization might inspire different emergent models of peer-to-peer networking in the pandemic than we're enacting here in Discord. This is the back end of everyone that's watching us on other platforms. We thus see Discord as a platform and digital media mainstream digital media platforms in general, which connect us and which alienate us from the aims of restitution, justice, reparation. In connecting us for now, it might yet take us to those other modes of networking. I'll let Piper, our second facilitator today, introduce themselves and the project.
Thanks, Razan, and thanks to everybody tuning in. My name is Piper Curtis. I'm a first-year MA student in Concordia's Media Studies program, a multidisciplinary artist, sound person, what have you. Today we're talking about Talking to Each Other, which is a multimedia collaborative research creation project directed by Simone Lucas with the Access in the Making Lab, AIM, and the Feminist Media Studio, FMS, in partnership with Accessibilize Montreal and Suoni Popolo. The Feminist Media Studio is a research creation lab at Concordia that focuses on creative actions and research that are feminist, intersectional, anti-racist, and decolonial. AIM is an experimental research hub from Concordia concerned with disability, access, and affordances. In this project, the FMS, AIM, and our community partners aimed to collectively work, tinker, and experiment with the frictions and challenges between technologies, access, and critical forms of media making. To explore these questions, we launched Talking to Each Other, a collective sounding project. Over the course of this initiative, FMS and AIM members and our community were invited to create recorded narrative, interview, sound art, and multisensorial pieces on the theme of access, sound, and technology. The project emerged out of the FMS's recent installation of a sound recording booth in its production suite. In purchasing this equipment, the FMS was excited to make sound recording accessible to student members for whom access to sound studios on campus and off was frequently restricted, while also coming up against issues of access to campus and physical access to the booth itself. For the first phase of the project, FMS and AIM members produced the sound creations you just heard in the context of a 2-week workshop led by myself and Razan. And throughout the workshop, we engaged in a conversation and collective learning experience around feminist, accessible, and decolonial listening and sounding practices, informed by the work of Pauline Oliveros, Dylan Robinson, and Christine Suncam, among others. And I realize I forgot to describe myself, so I'll do that now so you know who's talking. I am a white non-binary person with a shoulder-length light pink mullet, blue eyes. I'm wearing a black button down with an orange collar and an orange sleeve on the right-hand side. So to get started, we're going to hear from our participants about their pieces in the context of this workshop. And to begin, we're going to hear from Prakash Krishnan, whose piece we heard at the beginning. It is a sonic translation of the booth as infrastructure and speaks very directly to the sound booth that the project was centered around. Prakash, I'll pass it over to you.
Sorry, Prakash, before you, if I may interrupt, I'm just gonna read out the 3 questions that framed our thinking process, just before you go ahead and elaborate on that. I can't find my questions. There they are. Okay, so how is the form audio tech subjects in a transpiring relationship with the content of the piece? How is your creative process both an aesthetic, an ethic, and a politic? How can working with the technology itself reveal a network of relations that reflects on intersectional notions of access? Can our collective research creation process think through and emerge with any solutions towards making this booth more accessible? So these are the questions that we posed to the participants in this workshop, and hopefully they can talk to us more about that vis-a-vis each of their pieces. Prakash, please go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you, Piper and Razan. So hello, everyone. This is Prakash speaking. I'm a late 20s, brown-skinned, bearded person with black hair and a messy bun. I am wearing glasses, a blue-collared shirt with a few buttons undone because it's hot and because I broke my button. And I'm wearing large black headphones. In the background is my living room with my shelf of plants in view. So for my piece, specifically, the form, technology, and the subject are quite enmeshed, since I was interested in engaging with the politic and process of audio description and recording, and doing all this inside of the booth at the Feminist Media Studio. And up until recently, I assumed that descriptive work, such as captioning for television and film, which I used to do as a full-time career, alternative text for image descriptions and audio descriptions for multimedia work, which I do now for my other job, was apolitical. This, of course, started to change for me when my work shifted into describing objects of a political nature, such as descriptions of contemporary art exhibitions, as well as other cultural, ethnic, and race-based descriptions. And so for me, doing this project as someone who doesn't have a standard radio voice. I have a fluency disorder, and I bring with me to my practice of description my own inherent experiences, perspectives, and biases. I really came to understand how all description is political because we, as the describers, are inherently political regardless of whichever axes of privilege or marginalization we occupy. And so in thinking about unpacking the political nature of ordinary and ubiquitous things like descriptions and like the infrastructures in which we, record things like a sound booth. For me, the sound booth became this interesting site and object of analysis and experimentation. And so, as I recounted in my program note, there have been, or there are, I should say, many barriers of access to the booth, aside from just its inability to accommodate a wheelchair, which is not to say necessarily that a wheelchair user couldn't still use it, but just that a wheelchair would not be able to roll in. And just from being present in the space during the time in which the research of this booth was being conducted, I had a good idea of the difficulty in achieving this kind of gold standard, we can say, of accessibility. And so what I attempted to do in my piece was to explore sonically and aesthetically using the booth itself, the environment within which it exists, that is also not truly accessible, not for reasons of limited mobility, because the building and the lab itself is wheelchair accessible, um, but because of the ways that the university and the culture we live in of the privatization of space dictates certain boundaries of access and inclusion um, that I think exists at a much more philosophical level than that of the mechanics of this one specific booth, whether or not it is or is not accessible. So, what I'm trying to do with my piece and my work in general, which tends to be very audio based because I talk a lot. I talk a lot and I talk too fast. Sorry about that. Is to think about access and the accessibilizing of spaces, not just as a practice of performing a certain due diligence against anti-ableism, but to build upon a practice of turning access into invitation. And I think I'll stop there and pass it on to one of my fellow collaborators. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. Up next, we're going to hear from Raphael Bessette, Viens. Sorry if I mispronounced your name.
No problem. Hello, everyone. So my name is Raphael. I am a young white person. I have short, dark hair, brown eyes, and round glasses. And I'm wearing a white t-shirt today. In my background, there is a small library, and you can see the door frame behind me. So I'm just going to talk maybe slightly, maybe like really coming back on what you said, Prakash, about like how description is political. This is what kind of like interested me in exploring in the context of this workshop. And I was very inspired by the work of Christine Sun Kim, especially her piece Closed Reading, where she does a piece where she comes and rewrites the closed captioning of some films, inspired by her own experience as a deaf person and also the experience of other friends close to her that are also deaf. And so I was very interested in this, and I was thinking of the project as the piece as being something already having like a visual component by thinking through accessibility and making it accessible to people who cannot hear the piece. And with that, it connected with this experience that I've had talking to people, and people talking when they talk about sometimes of their memories and how some of when they describe sounds, they imitate the sounds that they make. So instead of saying it was a sound that sounded like ting ting ting, they actually they make it was a ting ting ting. And so I thought that was very interested in how that pointed towards the very subjective forms, the very subjective nature of listening and subjective nature of interpreting sounds as well. And that had the possibility also to go across barriers of language that was not specific to a language, but that could be flexible and also very personal, because some imitations of sounds are also different in different languages as well. So that was kind of like the idea, the motivation that I wanted. So the aesthetic, I guess it would be an aesthetic that is more experimental, aesthetic that is not necessarily narrative or descriptive is what I was trying to look for. Ethically, I wanted to really have the preoccupation of accessibility and really incorporate the idea of closed captions and subtitles within the project and not necessarily as an add-on after. And then I guess also for the poetic, I don't know, I guess I will see if it works in the form, so it's everyone's sensibility, but that's my 2 words about the piece, and I'll pass it on to someone else and let it open to questions for later. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Raphael. Up next, we'll hear from Caitlin Chan.
Everyone, I'm Caitlin. I'm an East Asian woman with a black bob with bangs. My skin is burnt on one half of my face, although I don't know if that shows on Zoom, and is okay on the other side. And then I am with a mostly blank background with a little bit of brown paper that I can kind of see out of the corner of my eyes in the back. And I'm wearing a red plaid shirt. So I guess for my piece, I was thinking about accessibility to the sound booth. I am currently not in Montreal. I'm in Vancouver at the moment, so I can't access the sound booth. There are very many barriers, mostly of which are geographical at the moment. So I instead kind of like continued that thought into thinking of what sort of technologies and things I did have at hand while over here. And one of the things that Concordia gives is Microsoft Word as a part of being a student here. And I have kind of developed that sort of like a relationship, I guess, with AI through the dictate function there. And I want to show that through my piece. Sorry, I feel like I'm not going quite directly to the questions, but I felt, similar to Prakesh's thoughts on like having like a radio voice and speaking properly and having it be heard correctly. I felt utilizing Word and its dictate function, the way that doesn't quite translate what I'm saying or the thoughts I think I'm conveying correctly, kind of shows the disconnects that can happen even when things are trying to be made accessible. Kind of shows the process in building accessibility. But I'll stop it there and pass it to the next collaborator. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. Next, we're going to hear from Amanda Gutierrez.
Hello, everyone. I'm here in Montreal. I'm in my studio. You can see there is a small studio office. I have black hair, white shirt. I'm a Latinx person, and I have brown skin. The project that I presented is actually a teaser, and is actually the I think the introduction of an augmented reality walk that I want to develop or present. It's currently under development in the end of the summer. And this workshop actually helped me to understand how this, just to start, this introduction will give a more brief explanation, but also invite in a general way the audiences, and in this case people who want to walk and transit with me, a general explanation of what is the project about. And while I'm doing this, I actually changed location, and I was considering, through making several sound walks, the point of accessibility, like who actually can access those spaces, how we can access those spaces, either by walking and also with other forms and other ways of understanding the senses. So I've been doing that while I was doing this project, and that really helped me to highlight those. So now when we are speaking about accessibility, I'm not only speaking about ableism, but I'm also speaking about gender inclusion, ethnicity in the public space, because to me it's very important to understand and to have clear this under my own research, that the walk as such, the leisure of walk as such, is not accessible, is not something that everyone can have access at any time in the day or any time in the night, especially in any place in the world. I mean, it's very. I think there is a lot of problems and there is a lot of points of political and the political it's very important here to understand who can have access to the public space. It's not everyone. So to me, that's an important point when we are when I was developing this project, and especially in relationship of gender and the relations of gender in the public space. So thank you, and I will pass it to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Next, we'll hear from Jessie Stainton.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here, and thank you to all our participants, Access in the Making Lab, and FMS for hosting this space for all of us, I guess, and Suoni. I'll do a quick intro of myself. So I'm Jessie. I'm a mid-20s white woman with curly red hair that is in sweaty heat-induced bun. I'm wearing a beige shirt with a plaid collar. I'm giving you very much knockoff Burberry vibes. I'm in my studio. There's a white background, some weavings behind me, and a mirror to my right. So for this project, I wanted to be really accountable to process in this piece. So I took a kind of different approach. Instead of choosing a theme first, I chose a site. And so I picked Jari Park, which is a park right by my house that I had been interested in approaching and studying more for a while, because I think there are so many ways to approach a public park, and specifically Jari Park, under a lens of accessibility. So just some quick context. Jari Park is located in uptown Montreal. It's a huge gathering spot, which has been increased during the pandemic, so it can be very lively at times. It's in between the neighborhoods of Park X and Villeray, which are rapidly gentrifying at very different rates. There's frictions of a notable lack of public amenities in some areas, but then there's also a free public pool, a free wading pool, and like lots of green space and barbecues. There's also a police station, so there's a high police presence in the park, which I think dictates how we move through this space. So that's just a little background, I guess, but sensory process, I wanted to interact with sonic methodology in a way that reflects my approach to access, which is to first slow down, observe, listen, and look. So I ended up starting with a sound walk, kind of inspired by Hildegard Westerkamp, and just kind of seeing what emerged from me walking. And so what notably emerged for me most was all the frictions in accessibility that exist. My favorite time in the park is early in the morning because it's one of my only access to quiet and nature in the city. But my favorite spot, and I find the most quiet and easiest to hear the red-winged blackbirds, requires balance and hopping over 7 steps. Furthermore, access to quiet nature is hard to find as the weather gets warmer and the park is more lively. As it's a place for everyone to go, I'm doing air quotes there, it presents another kind of tension of access, use, and versus quiet. And then I guess just to sum up, I reference, like kind of an example of one of these frictions is I reference the crusty curb cut in my piece, which is a friction of, as you're getting in from the Fayal entrance, there's a curb cut that almost like completely degraded, and then you enter onto these really big new paved paths, which are totally like in code for access, but when you're not thinking holistically, you kind of miss this, like, who is using the park essentially. So I found that all these kind of contradictions ended up mirroring the access of the sound booth at the Feminist Media Studio, and that it's giving students and people access to sound record at a high quality, which is best done in an enclosed space. But then this comes at the cost of many actions that a lot of my other participants have kind of already mentioned. So reflecting on this, I think that Prakash hit the nail on the head with the phrase, just because a wheelchair couldn't fit in the booth, it doesn't mean that a wheelchair user can't use it. because I think that frictions are interdependent with solutions, because access isn't monolithic, as we all move through space differently. And so kind of the best things we can do is be transparent, give space to think and work through access as a creative process. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you.
Thanks, Jessie. Next, we'll hear from Anne-Marie Trepanier.
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. So my name is Anne-Marie. I'm an artist, an editor, and a second-year student in the MA program in Media Studies at Concordia. I'm a white person with short, dark blonde hair and round glasses, and I wear a white t-shirt today. And in the background behind me, you can see sort of like a bookshelf with plants on it. So in my piece, I was interested in kind of trying to dig out past technologies, in this case from the 70s, that offered an alternative to oral perception of sound, and to examine their kind of utopic qualities through a somewhat sci-fi audio piece. So I thought that it was interesting to kind of use translation in these technologies and to analyze how they act as a form of conversion, where information is being compressed or converted into one form to the other. And what that opens up as a question is there some sort of effect on sensorial perception, and to question the hegemony of audiovisuality and that over other senses such as touch, smell, and taste. So as an exercise, I was kind of trying to show how we could imagine a way to re-embody sound and to imagine using the whole body as a membrane for listening and as an alternative to access the erotic quality of sound itself. A bit about the methodology, because it's not necessarily clear in the piece. So I worked with an old cassette tape answering machine, a Zoom recorder, and synthesizers to produce all of the sounds that are in the piece. Also used my own voice. And what I did is that I was recording myself reading excerpts from the archival materials that I was working with. In this case, a publication that is called Computer Lib Dream Machines by Ted Nelson, and a Rolling Stone article that addresses the creation of this piece of technology called the sonic stimulator. And I wanted to recreate a kind of sound quality that could reflect this idea of time passing, of deterioration, and of technology failing through time. And basically, when I was reading the Rolling Stone article about the sonic stimulator, which is a machine that translates sound into vibrations that can be perceived by the body, one thing that really struck me was the fact that one couldn't use the sonic stimulator by themselves. They had to have some sort of operator that would use the machine on their bodies. And this idea of having an operator of the machine kind of made me think about this, let's say, the presence that is inserted between the machine and its user. So in what sense, I was wondering, what is it that stands between technology and users? How does this impact accessibility? And maybe this idea of an operator can represent interfaces, protocols, norms, industry standards, designs, but also systems of power and ways to access resources. So yeah, basically, by saying that, I don't want to fall also into like somewhat of a techno-determinist standpoint. I do think that users have agency over technology and how it is used, and that they can also find ways to disrupt the way technology is built and who it is built for and what it is built for. And I think that disabled communities have really shown how to do that with hacking technologies of all kinds, urban technologies, architectural technologies, languages, in order to correspond to their needs. And one example of that is ramps and other devices that are installed to adapt spaces. And to conclude, just to echo Jessie and Prakash, I really appreciated what you said about accessibility as an issue that is at the intersection of different systems of power, and considering it as a relational concept and something that requires a relational approach and something that is always updated and evolving. So if we take the sound booth, for example, what else in its location, in its physical configuration, in access, in regards to like the university and the institution, does block its accessibility? What are the costs of getting into the institution? Is the transport system to get on site easy to navigate? So all those things that just kind of layer up and make spaces accessible or inaccessible. So now I'll pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. Now we'll hear from our last student participant, Rebecca Waldy.
Hi, everyone. I am Rebecca. I am a PhD student at Concordia University in the Communications Department. Sorry, my voice is going. To describe myself, I am a white female, long blonde hair. I'm wearing a gray shirt, and I have a very dark background with pictures in the far distance behind me. To speak a bit about my piece, I was focusing a lot on the process of audio recording and the process of storytelling. I wanted to focus on the idea of using fairy tales as a healing process and kind of the accessibility of creating fairy tales for adults as a way of learning about ourselves and learning about our mental health and our mental illnesses. When looking at the questions that Razan asked us, I was much more drawn towards the one about technology and how it reveals intersectional notions of access, and thinking about how we craft experiences in audible ways without necessarily always thinking about people who have different types of auditory experiences from our own. So I was thinking a lot about auditory experiences in processing healing, and I think a lot of other people were thinking of audio as a way of processing accessibility physically. So I really was drawn to this idea of just in general audio building and us creating spaces that are both accessible and inaccessible in different ways than, say, the physical spaces that we're dealing with. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just stop it there.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. I have a lot of questions, but maybe Arceli, the AIM Lab and the collaboration between AIM and FMS, and yeah, and we also have two artist participants who are not department, and so maybe we'll follow Krista and Jonathan.
I lost some of the things you have said, Razan, but I'll try to respond with whatever I have heard. So thank you everyone for the wonderful pieces and your very thoughtful and insightful commentary. It was very nice to hear them, and thank you for all the work and really carefulness you have put into your pieces. I'm really in amazement of everything that has been done. Yes, this has been a first collaboration project between Feminist Media Studio and Access in the Making Lab, and hopefully future to come. We were integrating the issue of access from an intersectional lens, which most of the projects here are powerfully reflecting it. It's not just about the accessibility of a sound booth, but also generally thinking about access. As Parakash beautifully described, it's access as an invitation, and access something that is evolving, as other members have put it, and access as a research creation, really. And this is what the newly established Access in the Making Lab will be focusing on. Access not as something about codes, legislations, technologies, but access as research creation, And in line with disability justice, creating projects that are by disabled people and or with disabled people and learning from the knowledge, skills, and expertise of disability communities. Yes, very happy to be part of this collaboration. And to give an image description of myself, this is Arsili speaking. I'm an olive-skinned woman in her 40s. I just turned 40s. I cannot still accept that. In her 40s, of Turkish origin, with short, dark black hair, dark framed glasses. Behind me is a library, and on the right of the screen is a plant, and my walls are white. Thank you.
Krista.
Hi, everybody. My name, oh, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm a white non-binary person with short platinum hair and large black framed glasses. I have a striped shirt on, and I have a tattoo with mountains and a river on one arm, and Tatlin's monument to the Third International on the other. I'm sitting by a window in a darkened room, so the lighting is a bit Dutch portrait style. And I'm speaking to you from the land of the Anishinaabe people at my cabin in the woods. I'm just really grateful to be part of this as someone who is listening and learning. And as a member and co-director of the Feminist Media Studio, I think there's something really precious about intersectional feminists thinking and making sound through questions of access. And I think one of the things that's so interesting about these pieces is the way that feminism historically has been about giving voice or amplifying voice. And what I see as so poignant in all of these pieces is about unsettling voice and really thinking in other kinds of ways about the sounds we make, the sounds we hear, well beyond voice, and how impactful they might be for thinking about rights or power or agency. What are the relationships of the producing sounds or receiving sounds bodily in our bodies, as Anne-Marie made clear, and Prakash as well, in these really deep interactions with our environments and deep interactions with the environments that are barred from us. So where we can go into and where we can't go into, and how those influence the sounds that we engage with and the sounds that we make in relationship to them. And so I think what's really apt about all of these reflections and these collaborations and working together on these is really trying to think beyond voice about what kinds of intersectional feminist politics and disability justice politics can do in and through sound. And I just think these pieces are wonderful in process kind of reflections on that. And my own piece was really about trying to think about the privilege of quiet, and that when you're going to record sound, in fact, what you often need is not sound, but quiet, access to quiet. So those are some of the technological constraints, but they're located in a larger socio-political context in which quiet is a right that is only offered to few, and it really shows the disparities of access to justice in our society. And I'll just pass it on, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Jonathan, please.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jonathan. I just didn't hear what Krista said, so if I'm sure it was brilliant, but I won't be able to respond to it. I'm Jonathan. I'm a middle-aged white man. The camera has a great angle on my bald head. I'm wearing chunky headphones, a white linen shirt with a couple buttons open. Behind me are two acoustic panels, and I'm speaking to you from my office and music and sound room. So you can see books in the background, you can see some music equipment, and in the distance is Mr. Twinkle's the COVID unicorn. I was just named as a professor, but actually I came to this workshop more as a student because I'm not particularly experienced as a sound artist, although I have a lot of experience with editing and making audio. And I really, with the piece, struggled to find a sweet spot between didactic but not too didactic, trying to convey a sort of sense of the computer doing things and the sort of process of machine learning being applied to voices without focusing on what they're saying, without being too literal about it. That's sort of what I was going for with the piece. And honestly, I made it because I'm really mad. We moved online, and all of a sudden, there were a lot of pieces right away in March of 2020 about how people with disabilities are, sort of prepared for a situation like living in a pandemic with restricted movement, with sort of new regulations of sociality. But we also know that contexts and environments are both abling and disabling, and being online is abling and disabling in different ways. And so one of the things that came up very quickly was this sort of need for transcription. And of course, universities and our other institutions could have hired people to live transcribe what was happening, right? It could have been fairly compensated labor, and instead it went through this sort of automated, really automated, as in faux automated transcription service through Otter, which meant that all of our voices became the raw material for somebody else's IPO, right? Somebody else's pitch to venture capitalists and somebody else's opportunity to make money. So it's a classic contradiction of access, where the needs for access can be co-opted, where assistive technologies can become pretexts for completely other enterprises that aren't actually about providing access or fighting ableism in any way. So that's my piece. That's sort of, I was thinking about it in relationship to at least one of your questions, and I'll stop there. Oh, and I just want to thank everybody, since I'm the last speaker. I really enjoyed listening to all the pieces and interacting with you in the workshop.
I have a follow-up question on what Jonathan just said, but people have questions. Do you have questions for each other? I think this whole process would be wonderful if it culminates with a conversation between each other on the final.
Hi, Rosanne. Unfortunately, I've been given the note that we have to wrap up for 6. So we're going to have to leave it there, but maybe there's a question you want to leave everybody with, think about into the future. And hopefully we'll find a way to continue this conversation. But yeah, I want to take a second to thank everybody again for your work and your time and your energy and your thoughts. It's been a really great experience learning with all of you, from all of you. But yeah, Razan, I don't know if you have a final thought or like a question just to leave us with to ruminate on.
Actually, I'm just gonna use this time and invite everyone to join Simone Lucas, who directed this project, who installed the sound booth, who's been taking all this labor throughout this year. She will be in conversation with Amy Lowe and expert access consultants, sound producers, and members of the local disability justice collective Accessibilize Montreal on June 13. Please check Suoni del Popolo's website to know the exact time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks to Suoni for having us.